Be kind to yourself. Just be kind to yourself so that you can be motivating first for kindness in this world. So take care of yourselves, self-soothe. Um, Only stakes get done. People don't get done. So we're all on a path.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, hyper-conscious mastermind. What is this, week 26?
26.
Week 26, we have a very special guest. We were lucky enough to interview him, I don't know when, probably a month or two ago. We were blown away by him, not just his knowledge, but his energy. You hear me talk about energy so often. Pripo has this calming energy, reassuring energy. He's going to drop a ton of knowledge. He has been a psychotherapist for over 15 years. He's helped thousands of couples or thousands of people, and he has a podcast as well, and you know we have a very special place in our heart for podcasters. Ladies and gentlemen, Pripo Teplitsky.
Take it away,
Hey,
Pripo.
everybody. Hey there.
Pripo, I think at the end of the day, relationships are something that we all tend to end up in, and I think a lot of people think they're going to succeed by accident, right? We end up in these relationships because we want them, but not everybody has they haven't developed the skills necessary in a lot of times to sustain the relationship. What advice do you give to people? Let's start with, what advice would you give to somebody who is single, who is looking to attract or create the relationship of their dreams?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great question, first of all, because I think what we do, we go about thinking about what kind of relationship we want or what kind of partner we want. And I think that that's a fairly fine road to go down. But I think that the better road to go down is thinking and feeling and visualizing, what kind of partner do I want to be? Because when we focus on how we want to be in situations, do we want to be patient? Do we want to be kind? Do we want to be compassionate? Do we want to be empathetic? We need to see ourselves do that in relationship. And if we can visualize ourselves in a relationship that we're doing it, that's how partners inspire each other, by one doing it and the other one has the inspiration from the feeling of receiving. So I think that there's a better intention and better expectation of, instead of trying to picture what it is that the ideal partner you want, work on how do you want to be? How do you want to show up?
It's powerful. What do you got?
So I want to encourage everybody to ask questions just so everyone knows. I did tell Pripo, or ask Pripo's permission for this. He doesn't mind if you interrupt. This can be more of a dialogue, a back and forth. Now, from Pripo's lens, he's worked with, again, thousands of people on intimate relationships, so he's probably come across it. And you've been married for 25 years, Pripo, right? So there's probably not a lot in this arena that you haven't at least seen on some level. So anyone can hammer questions anytime. You can put them in the chat, or you can just, unmute and shout them out. It's entirely up to you. And Pripo, also, in terms of the frame, feel free to go deep on whatever you think is valuable, and then have people, interrupt you with questions throughout.
Great.
What is something that you would share, Pripo? If we said, all right, what is we'll say 3 most important things everybody in this room would be better to learn? Like, if they left this room, these 3 things would help them in their relationships for the rest of their life. What would you give them?
Some basics, but they're really deep, because it's mastering a habit, and one that I believe people know, but being a really empathetic and deep listener. We're challenged by deep listening skills, because when usually we're listening, we have our own self-dialogue and our own self-talk going. We think, it was not Thursday. I did not say that. We're already up in our own stories, and we're not being curious and interested of what is going on with our partner. We're trying to defend ourselves. We're trying to be right and explain. So really working on deep listening skills, especially when you're triggered. I needed to do that last night and this morning better than I did. And so I'll tell you that's just a forever focus to have. 2 other things that I think I call my bookends, and that is apologizing well and appreciating well. If you do those very well, really appreciate what you have in the relationship and who the person is and how they walk in the world, not just of how they relate to you in your relationship, but how you see them relating to other people and how they show up in their life. Appreciation, and I know that both of you have talked about this on your podcast and how that's benefited your relationship. It's an art, a deep, deep level of appreciation. And the same with apologies. You know, most of us just give this, I'm sorry. What the hell do you want from me? I said, I'm sorry. You know, that doesn't cut it. You know, a deep appreciation is totally taking ownership and responsibility for your behavior or your action. Being empathetic towards the other person, meaning imagining what they must have felt when you did it. No explaining, no defending. That's like if you can think about an apology that you don't have to explain and you don't defend, because when you do that, you're making it about yourself. An apology should be about the other person, how you hurt them, how you caused some pain, how you took away trust. So there's many levels of apologies that we can go into, as well as appreciation. But to me, those are basically the three things that I think when you really focus and work that well, you'll be more authentically relating with responsibility and accountability.
Powerful. One of the things that I want to ask you is common patterns. So you've seen a lot of couples over a lot of years, and I remember when I did fitness coaching, I would see the same pattern. Okay, you're not drinking enough water. The same pattern is you don't have your own water bottle. Every single time, it's that one thing of a water bottle within arm's length.
Oh, he jeffed it.
Which I think mine is in here. I know that it is. I just think it. Oh, here we go. There it is. But so for you with relationships, what are the most common patterns that you find that people get tripped up on? And what can they do, not only a deeper understanding of the root cause, but also tactically to shift those patterns?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest patterns is how we go back and forth, usually when we're emotional or being triggered, and we're vying for space to be heard and be understood. And when both people are doing it at the same time, it doesn't happen. So I call it to learn to let the other person have stage. Let's select one person, you know, and it's not really a choice. You just default to it. Maybe it's like, my partner has some anger. I'm going to try to validate and understand, acknowledge, be curious about what's going on in their world. Not all of a sudden come into what about me? And because it will just go back and forth and nobody feels heard and nobody feels acknowledged. When one person feels acknowledged and validated, now they have room for the other person. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do that right at the same time. It might not be in the same 10, 15-minute process. It could be the next day. It could be now that I was able to be heard. I really want to hear you, and I'll give you the stage. I'll inquire. You can tell me what's going on without, again, defending, explaining, and more about acknowledging and validating, but being curious and interested. It's not about being right and saying, I didn't say that, I didn't do that, I didn't mean that. It's like, wow, you were hurt when you heard me say that. That must have been awful. That must have felt like I betrayed you. And I'm thinking, well, I never betrayed you and I had no intentions. That's not going to help somebody feel heard of their experience. So to me, that's the biggest pattern, the dysfunctional pattern, is around how people process their conflict. They don't get to repair, as you said earlier, Alan, understanding. Understanding is the root of why we have conflict. We need to try to understand what's underneath our conflict instead of the biggest addiction about being right and proving ourselves.
Pripo, Alan and I were on an interview recently called Men Up, and it was all about being vulnerable and being like kind of what the opposite of what men are told they should be. Right? Yeah. Like we have this mask of masculinity where you don't cry, you don't show your emotions, and a lot of people are raised that way. What advice would you give? Right now there's a lot of women in here because we have a lot of women listeners, but what advice would you give each side? So say you're with a man who struggles to open up. You don't know how he feels because he doesn't necessarily tell you. In his mind, that's negative and that's weak. So what advice would you give to a woman to help communicate with that? Also, what advice would you give to a man who is struggling to open up as well? So both sides.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start with the first one that you asked about my advice to women. And That would be bringing up soft startups. And that's not blowing smoke up his butt. A soft startup is saying, I have something that's in my heart that I want to express to you so that I can get closer to you, instead of, we need to talk. I'm really upset and I need to talk. We get flooded. Men get flooded because one of the places that we go based on our society upbringing is shame and inadequacy. So automatically we feel that we did something wrong, and we may have, but if we get caught in shame, then we're not going to be able to take responsibility. It's just too painful to take responsibility when we're caught in shame. So if a woman is able to give more of a soft startup and not push, I want it, to say, I want to know how you're feeling. I want to know how you're feeling. Please tell me. If you don't tell me, that kind of pressure and overwhelm can be really challenging. So just not having that perfection around sharing, because for us men, when we start to take you said it's vulnerable, it is the most courageous thing that a man can do. In society, it's considered weak. Screw that. It's not weak. It's hard. That's why it's the most courageous thing to do. And so we need to encourage that vulnerability. So sometimes what's a challenge that I hear in my office is when a man does share, then a woman gets upset. I can't believe you said that. What? That's not what I did. And automatically that shame, because he expressed what it is that he was feeling that doesn't match the reality perhaps that their partner wants to hear, then there can be a quick shutdown. So it goes both ways to have that openness, to be able to be curious and hear, even if it doesn't match your expectation of what you want. Because one of the greatest, I think that men are fearful of getting knocked off the white horse. And I'll tell you what, women say that that's okay, but women are fearful as hell of their man getting knocked off that white horse also. So all of a sudden that now that stability of his strength is now taken away. So if that is held in tenderness and understanding, he's going to be able to feel safe and open up. And it's practicing with emotional vocabulary. We didn't grow up with that. So it's really expanding an emotional vocabulary. We were talking earlier in the pre-mastermind around using expressions like a part of me feels. When I say a part of me feels, I automatically know there's other parts of me. A part of me feels angry. A part of me feels distressed. A part of me feels worried. A part of me feels excited. A part of me feels hopeful. I can have 2%, 40%, 60% I want. So it allows us to not just be, just pinpointed and imprisoned by that we're supposed to have one feeling. So practicing that is really powerful. And I actually have a podcast on men and emotional honesty, and I talk about the challenges that men and partners have around navigating that.
So Pripo, you talk a little bit about shame versus guilt. And I've heard this framework from you. I'm pretty sure we asked you about this on the show, but for everyone in this room right now, what is the primary difference between shame and guilt? Because one thing that I do think is true, and I've often said this before, it's like for females in this country in particular, the number one form of shame statistically is body image. And it makes sense because we're putting this impossible, thing up there that everyone's supposed to be, right? And then I think that the number one form of shame for men, this isn't my stat, but someone said it and it really resonated, is success. And I know that as a man, I've always felt that very, very heavy weight of like, you need to be extraordinary at everything you do. And it doesn't leave a lot of room for vulnerability. Even in this mastermind, things not going perfectly, like let's just accept the fact that we're imperfect. It's very difficult for a man to do that. So when it comes to shame versus guilt, can you explain that framework? And then can you try to give us some light in where you see shame and guilt showing up in relationships that we all can probably resonate with?
Yeah. I like to differentiate, and that's a great question because it shows up constantly, especially in heterosexual relationships. But I like to look at that. Guilt is I did a bad thing. It's my behavior. And shame is I'm a bad person. It goes to my personhood. And when we're caught in shame, that means it doesn't matter what we do or the other person says, we make it about ourselves. Like, I'm a shit. I can't do it good. I'm just bad. You shouldn't even be with me. Guilt can be a healthy behavior because we can actually springboard off of it to change. If I know that my behavior hurt somebody that I care about, or perhaps somebody that I didn't care about, but now I know that it did, I need to feel some of that remorse so that I can change and want to change my behavior. But I have to have a certain level of self-compassion to be able to do that. Because if I go, wow, man, I missed that. I'm so sorry that I said those words that hurt you. That sense of self-compassion, hey, I don't hit the bullseye all the time. I'm not perfect. I do the same thing. If I can work my emotional ladder up to be able to take accountability, then I can work off of guilt. Shame, you can't do that, because shame just makes it all about how bad we are. So I think like those are the two differentiations, is that shame is about me and my personhood, and guilt is about my behavior. That doesn't necessarily mean who I am. It's what I do, what I say, and of course that's part of me, but it's not ingrained in just a basic flaw. How I see, Alan, what you said, I like to differentiate a little bit of the shame for men around success. I'd like to just flip it and say that the shame is actually inadequacy. So men have a really hard time dealing with inadequacy, which is not succeeding. It could even show up when in the relationship, if their woman isn't happy right at that moment, we feel that in order to be a successful partner, we need to make our partner feel happy, feel good. And when she's not, we take that personally and feel inadequate of like, man, I'm not a good partner. I'm I'm a shitty partner. So I think it's like understanding that vulnerability of like, wow, I feel uh sad, I feel remorseful, I feel inadequate about how to do this. For me, it shows up in like being a handy guy. I didn't grow up around that. I'm not a handy guy. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm getting to be way more of a handy guy. I got chainsaw and chaps, all kinds of things as a city mountain boy now. But before, if I didn't know how to fix the light bulb, I'd get really upset and angry. And that's what men do when we feel inadequate. We jump over the vulnerability and we express anger, blame, we stonewall, just shut down, or we withdraw, or a combination of all of those. When we do that, that exacerbates a woman's feeling of fear and deprivation, the anxiety of not be connected, of the desire of connection of a relationship. So there's more isolation. So as a woman feels more isolation and more fear and anxiety, a man's inadequacy goes up, and there's just this teeter-totter effect that starts to happen. So it's moving in towards that vulnerability that we can recognize and not play that a roundabout game trying to be understood, but understand that the isolation that a woman's feeling is because usually of the expression of the man's feeling of inadequacy. That's not vulnerability. It's more about anger or blame or shutdown.
And that's just another way to deal with those emotions in a less savory way rather than feel them. If you don't mind, I'll ask one more question.
Man, just hammer it. Just hammer it.
Did you have another one? Ready?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Does anybody have anything?
Yeah, there's a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Let's rock.
Would you explain what that heartbreak feeling is, particularly integrating your knowledge of attachment and how we can rework our relationship with pain?
Yeah, around attachment. If we didn't grow up around that, our feelings, especially our negative feelings, were actually accepted and encouraged in some way, and that we had a soothing when we were in distress, then we then take it upon ourselves to say that a relationship is not safe for soothing. So I'm going to go ahead and just withdraw on my own. I got to protect myself. And that's where stonewalling and withdrawal happens a lot. So it is taking the risk to trusting that the relationship can be an avenue and a container for soothing. That's why it's so important to slow down and not try to get to resolution so fast in a conflict, as opposed to just acknowledging and validating the emotions and what's needed for comfort at that time and to be heard. So when we're heard and acknowledged, it feels safer to come into attachment than if we were shut down, told we were wrong, or no comfort in it at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
Were there any other questions in the chat, Amy? Is that the only one so far? I know I saw a couple comments come through.
Yeah, no, it's just been comments, but that's the only one so far.
Okay. Do you want to hammer your next one?
I can hammer it. Yeah, you got a couple lined up.
I got one.
Okay.
But after you.
Pripo, this is something that I've struggled with in the past. I'm definitely guilty of this. How do you go about communicating stress to somebody who is stressed out? Because my fear is like unloading my stuff on somebody else, whether it's an intimate relationship or Alan and I, that's something that we've experienced as well. But what advice would you give me specifically when it's like, there's a lot going on. We have, Alan and I have multiple businesses. We're doing this 5 times a week, clients, fitness, all of that happy jazz. And there's a lot of stress that goes along with the uncertainty of business, as you know. And I'm stressed out fairly often, but I don't think I always do a great job of showing that to other people. What advice would you give?
Well, one is that you got to recognize your stress level. And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people, especially, well, I shouldn't say men, but because I think women also feel like they got to be the superwoman, business lady, mom, sexy lover in bed. We got to be all of it, right? And it's the expectations that we have and we continue to make ourselves create so much stress. So I call it registering our cup, to really see how full is my cup. If I can say, wow, I know I'm at 70%, because for me, I used to let it just pour over and I didn't recognize until it was just poured over. My wife was really good at recognizing her cup. She would say, my cup is getting full. And she would go take a bath. She would take a forest walk to empty her cup so that she could take on more of what life gives. And so recognizing first that we're stressed instead of expressing stress, because you could talk about stress without expressing it. And asking your partner if they're available. That's a really simple request, but we don't do it. We don't say, hey, I got a lot going on right now that I want to express to you. Are you available to hear what's going on for me? We have to be okay if, of course, the answer is yes. And if the answer is yes, that means like you're going to give me some space. And we got to be okay if the answer is no. Hopefully no means I'm not available because I love you and care about you. I'm not present myself. I will tell you when I am. How about in an hour or tonight at 7 or tomorrow? Like when you say no, it's really good to say when you are going to be available so the person doesn't feel like abandoned and not supported. But when we are, let's say, available for it, it's really good for either party to say, we talked about this in the pre-mastermind, express your needs. What do you need at that moment? Do you want to just be heard only? Like, hey, I just want to talk for about 5 minutes and just get it out. Or, hey, I really want you to reflect back what you heard so I feel heard. Or I really want some advice after I speak, because I'm puzzled about what to do next. So I really want your advice. Because if the listener comes in with advice when all we want to be is heard, or that feeling, right? That's not what I want. You're not giving me what I want. I don't want you to fix it. I just want to be heard. That can be mitigated by asking for it, saying what you request. So I guess, Kevin, to just put out is like recognizing that you are stressed. And if you really are stressed, I would say do some things to take care of it first, whatever it is that you self-soothe. If you need to take a walk yourself, hop in the shower, run some cold water, take some deep breaths so that when you are expressing that stress, it's more palatable for the person to witness it than that stress is coming to them. And when both people are stressed, that's not going to be the avenue. Maybe one of you have to go to another friend to be able to empty some of that cup so that you could be available for the other person. Because when two people are stressed, you're not going to get your needs met at that time.
I just saw a fire question come in.
Yeah, I believe so.
Can we share that question anonymously, please, Amy?
Yeah. So over a 20 to 25 year marriage, neither one of you is the same person you fell in love with decades earlier. What advice would you have for couples who wake up and no longer recognize one another, especially if they haven't done the work for 20 years and haven't learned the tools along the way? Where do they begin?
That's a great question. Forgiveness that they didn't do the work, to accept that they didn't do the work and not, again, feel shame, blame themselves or blame the other person, but recognize there's a desire and intent and interest to now want to get to know each other on another level. And just making that commitment of intention, it can be absolutely huge. It's like we got to enter in a whole new ball game. So instead of putting the pressure on, let's be creative. Let's have fun at this. Whether it's, let's pretend that we're going on a date for the first time and we know nothing about each other. Let's start asking some really interesting questions. Or tell me something about in 5th grade that you never told me before or to anybody else. I had a circus of worms and I used them and twisted them up, whatever it is, to get curiosity and interest going in the relationship. And cultivate friendship. Friendship for me, that is the foundation of a long-term relationship. I love being able to speak with my wife. The thought of sitting on the porch, when we're 57, I'm 57, my wife's 61. We've been sitting on the porch from day one. We were able to talk with each other like that. But it gets sweeter and sweeter because we're getting more and more comfortable with each other, but also still more curious about each other because letting each other change. Oh, you don't like that anymore. Oh, you used to want to do that, but you no longer. You have different dreams. What are they now? To have that open space to get to know each other. And it's the intention and the risks, taking the risk to do things new. Couples don't have to have everything compatible at all. It's just finding some overlaps and at times doing and some things that the other person likes just because you like to be around that person, not because you don't like the thing that they're interested in. Who cares about the thing that they're interested in? What about how they relate to that thing that you might not be interested in? If you're interested in the person, you'll be interested in how they feel about their relationship to whatever it is that they are interested in. So again, it's cultivating that intention.
Pripo, one time I was at dinner with a close friend and I said, "What do you think is the rarest character trait in the world?" And she ended up saying hope, which was kind of depressing at that time. I thought it was self-discipline. But the point is I want to give everyone out there hope for relationships in general and the benefit of them. And so I know that you've helped so many couples. Would you be willing and able to share an anonymous story of a couple that was really, really on the edge, about to break up, that now has this magnificent relationship because they were willing to put in the work?
Yeah, I'll just put it like anonymously. I have several couples in the years I've done the work that have experienced this, and one of the biggest one of the biggest pains and suffering is around betrayal and infidelity. And I had several couples, that have gone through different degrees. And what I mean by different degrees, it's either a one-time infidelity or ongoing infidelity, or the close proximity of the infidelity, meaning of having an affair with somebody's best friend, or for years, 10 years, and then that being uncovered. And that takes away a huge foundation around trust. And that is not an easy thing to rebuild around trust. But I have couples working at rebuilding that level of trust, going through the aspect of the pain and witnessing the other person's hurt. And I'm talking about witnessing it for a while. Like it could be a year, or more, like constantly. I tell couples, don't shy away. Even in 10 years, when you're watching a movie and there's infidelity in the movie, the person that betrayed, it's a great thing to lean over and say, "Hey, I just want to say, I am so sorry I hurt you." And that was 10 years ago. To not let it just be pushed underneath the rug, because then the other partner knows you still have empathy and know my pain. And so I would say that to me, that is the most courageous aspect that I see in couples when they're working through through what society says, and everybody has their own threshold, and I have no judgment if you say, if that happens to me, I'm done. Everybody's got non-negotiables. Absolutely. You're not any less for not working that through. Couples that do want to give that a try, whether it's because they have vested interest of kids or other things, or they never achieved, they can transform their relationship to go on a deeper level, that they get to understand the reasons and the causes of some of that action and behavior, and at times make it more solidified, because they know they're never going to touch that again. It's going to be really, really precious to not hurt each other in that way.
My goodness. So Taryn and I have been listening to a book called Mating in Captivity. I don't know who it's by. I'm not sure if you've heard of it.
Esther Perel.
Yes. See, he knows all the things. One of the things that really fascinated me and us, but me specifically, was when she was talking about intimacy. I always thought intimacy was connected to sex, but the way that she spoke about it, intimacy is like closeness, trust, warmth. How do you make sure that as you become more intimate, you don't lose passion along the way? Because she said that was one of the things to look out for.
Yeah, that's right. Intimacy that we kind of grew up, and that's just like swapping body fluids. That ain't intimacy, right? I mean, we use the word intimacy and automatically people think about sex. No, there's emotional intimacy, there's physical intimacy, there's sexual intimacy. And I like to define intimacy as to know and to be known. And so that means the vulnerability to be able to self-disclose enough so that I'm known, and to be interested and curious enough to want to really know the other person. And I think when we get on that level, we kind of squash a lot of the masks that we try to come to with, the things that we're hiding just to look good, or to avoid of being seen that way. Because if I'm seen of really who I am, you're not going to love me. You're not going to like me. When we actually get to that level, I know when people really disclose their vulnerability of who they are, I fall in love with them because it's truth. Yeah, I think everybody falls in love with truth. And if you can attach that to the person, and then have the understanding of now bringing that into your sexual relationship around play, because I think that sex is a way adults kind of play. And that means that you're going to enjoy, have fun, take risks, tell each other what you like, what you don't like. When as a kid, when I played, it was improv, and we made it up as we went along. And if we didn't like something and try something, we tried something else. So that kind of compatibility is so important, to have some passion in it. I also tell couples to do this exercise around having open-eyed sex, because when you are looking at the other person in that vulnerable setting and really wanting to know and see them on that deep level through the eyes, right, the windows of the soul, there is a connection and magic that can take place. There is this extra level of nakedness that we're being seen. So that's another level to play with on the intimacy around sex that creates passion. And as you said earlier, Alan, I think one of the greatest aphrodisiacs is appreciation. When we appreciate, and when I know that I'm really seen for who I am, I feel really good about myself, and I feel really attracted to my partner. And if I'm seeing her in a really beautiful light in so many areas, she becomes more and more attractive to me, because I'm seeing the value of who she is, and not just the physicalness. And passion can come from appreciation. So I like to look at it in that level of intimacy.
We have another question. What would you say to the children who carry pain within, and sometimes unknowingly, from the unconscious choices of their parents which negatively impacted them?
Yeah. Wonderful question. That happens. Absolutely. I mean, we carry trauma through generations. It's in DNA of people. It's in DNA of women, of being prey and sexism. It's in DNA of oppressed cultures. And we carry that with us. So as children, we're also going to carry some of our parents' trauma. whether it was from their parents, but also maybe even in our present life with them, being children of divorced parents. We're witnessing the pain, and at times we take it on. I like to look at if you take like a symbol of hot water heaters, and you take the parents are these big water heaters, and the children are the little ones with a little pipe being connected. When the parents are suppressing their anger or even acting it out, the pressure actually gets moved out to the kids, and the kids actually express the unresolved conflict and anger in dysfunctional ways. So we need to also do that as we recognize and we get older, that we are carrying some of our parents' trauma and some of our pain. And trauma is locked in the body. So it's also working to move it out of the body in movement, in ways of understanding where it gets locked in different parts of the body and body structure, the way we hold ourselves, the way that maybe we have pain in our throat because we have a hard time talking because we were shut down as kids, told to shut up. It's also recognizing on moving and purging the trauma that we took on. So it's a life endeavor at times for people. But if we do it with responsibility and not blame our parents, and because that's a big one, it's like we got to get out of the victimhood of blaming our parents and take responsibility. Okay, on some level, I took it on. I now no longer have to hold it. I can release it. I can purge it. I don't have to hold them responsible for my pain. That's disempowering.
Pripo, we did an episode earlier today on the questions you ask yourself and the dominant questions that you're asking yourself. And I remember this one time I was in bed late at night with Emilia, and she's like, "Are you okay, babe?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm just tired." When the truth was that I wasn't tired at all. I was up in my head, afraid of all this stuff. And I didn't have the courage in that moment to express it. So eventually I did, and I told her what I was afraid of. And we ended up way closer, and that was a great thing. But I do think, and I'll speak for men just because I'm a man, like I feel like we want to put on this front that we're not afraid of anything. And one of the questions I ask myself now whenever I'm triggered, or I try to, is what am I insecure about? What am I afraid of? And usually it comes down to I'm afraid to look incompetent because I'm afraid if I look incompetent, she'll feel uncertain. And if she feels uncertain, I'll lose love or whatever. That whole story we tell ourselves. Yeah. So what are some of the questions that you suggest to your clients that they ask themselves in those difficult moments when it's like, we've all been there where our partner's like, "Are you okay?" And you're like, "Yeah, I'm just exhausted." When in reality, you're just freaking out, right? And you could be vulnerable and courageous, or you can just suppress it and have that manifest in some negative way later. So what are some of the questions that can help people uncover that truth?
Well, the one that you said is a great one, to really understand what's underneath, and usually it is fear, especially underneath anger, is fear and sadness or grief. So it's good to ask those questions. I think one layer is to actually allow ourselves to pause before we answer it. You know, in our society, human beings, there's a common lie that people say at least 4 times a day. "I'm fine." Right? "How are you?" "I'm fine. I'm fine." We're not. And so we don't take the time to actually take a breath and answer that question from an authentic place. And when you take the breath, you become more authentically present. So I think practicing presence and allowing yourself to take up that space. One level to do that is to first go into your body. What's happening in your body? Where's the tightness? Where's the holding? You can say that first. "Wow, right now I'm noticing that my chest is tight. My throat is closing. My hands are clammy, and I'm a little cold." Right there, that's the microscopic truth. That's what's going on. The story or the labeling is more about what we're going to get into. The microscopic truth is the body. Once we recognize what the body is doing, there's almost a permission now to attach that to more labels of emotions and to a story. So if we just practice that more of noticing what's going on in our body, if I notice that my shoulders are up in my ears and I notice it, wow, I can relax it. And right at that moment of relaxation, my emotions start to shift. And I might even feel them more. I might even feel more vulnerable in sadness because I took away the armoring. And I think that we all have our own armoring, and it's really important to notice what is our armoring. When somebody says something, do we look away and look down? If I look away and look down, maybe I should look up and see the difference of how my emotions are. Maybe I change my body structure. So I think it's questioning what's going on in my body, and to ask the question again, and also what do I need to feel safe right now? And that might be a request. What I need to feel safe right now is just to tell you what I'm feeling without you interrupting or trying to fix it. That's what I need right now. So like even asking ourselves, what do we need right now? And we might not know, but we could take a guess, and that's fine. And if it's not what we need, we could try something else. So there's a way to go into that dialogue. What do I need? What do I want? What do I prefer? Because those are different ways of letting go of some attachment to outcomes. I think, can I just add one thing? In partnership, I think it's really good to ask this question. What am I doing that's making it difficult for me to get what I want? And what can I do to make it easier to get what I want? What I want is closeness, intimacy, connection, honesty. So I need to be observant. What am I doing that's making it difficult to get that closeness? People, you just rolled your eyes when your partner talked. Or people, you just looked away. You just interrupted it. If I can monitor my own behavior, then I'm not giving my partner responsibility to take care of me. So asking my own questions, what can I do? What am I doing that's making it difficult to get what I want? And what can I do to make it easier? If I don't know, I need to ask.
I don't know that you'll necessarily have an answer for this one. I don't know that it's part of your area of expertise, but you did mention breathing and how it brings you into the present. And Alan and I have been doing breath work together in the studio with our buddy Mark Metry. And every time, I'm sure you won't mind me sharing.
No, you're good.
We bawl our eyes out, basically. Like we're just crying over different things. And probably a month or two ago, we did a live mastermind with Samantha Skelly, who is a breath work coach. And there was probably 20 people in here crying. What is that about, man?
Our body is taking the trauma of a moment. If we had a trauma and fear, our bodies go, okay, man, I'm going to go bury it in the body so that you don't disintegrate right now. But you need to get to it because I can't hold it. But we forget about, I need to get to it, right? Like animals, when an animal gets away from, when a prey gets away from a lion, the first thing that the gazelle does, it shakes. It shakes off the trauma of that event. We human beings don't do that. So it's locked in the cells of our body in trauma. When we are doing breath work and conscious breath work, and we're oxygenating those cells and the blood flow and connecting the vagus nerve from the stomach into the brain, and all of that is starting to go, and the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, it starts to unleash and unwind what the body is holding. And we call it emotional release. And we may not have any idea where it's coming from and what's happening. It's to allow the body to let go of the trauma because it's been holding it. It needs to be relieved of it, or that's how a lot of diseases happen also. So the breath work is a wonderful way to create the release of the body's holding of trauma.
I would notice whenever I did breath work that my throat chakra would be like pulsing like very, very intensely. And I figured that that's where I suppress a form of suppression in the past from past trauma. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if again, you'll have an answer for this necessarily, but how do we identify that we are holding on to trauma? Is there symptoms of that? I mean, you just mentioned like illness and stuff like that. Like, how do we know that we're holding on to past trauma, and how do we know what the right diagnosis or prescription rather is for that? Breathwork for me has been the most healing out of every meditation, visualization, all that different stuff, praying. For me, breathwork's been the most healing. What do you suggest for your clients that need to do this inner work and free themselves from past trauma?
Yeah. Well, trauma shows up in all different ways, and it shows up a lot with anxiety. When we have emotional anxiety that we feel worried a lot, there's trauma because we're fearful of something happening, and usually it's anxiety about the anxiety coming on. People deflect, and they might go actually numb. Like when people are asked a question, "Wow, how are you feeling?" I'm not feeling anything. Actually, they're feeling so much that they're not able to express what it is they're feeling, that it's buried so much and suppressed that they just feel numb. That's an aspect of trauma. Being triggered, and if you're very defensive, and if you need to explain yourself and defend yourself, there's past trauma that's going on. Instead of just letting somebody have their experience of how they think of you, then you don't probably have a lot of trauma. But if you're so wedded to get somebody to understand you, there's probably some past trauma in that area. So a lot of times triggered responses and reaction shows trauma. And there's all kinds of trauma, right? We hear PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is an aspect of trauma. And that could be from, we call it little T's or big T's, right? A big T is a big catastrophic event, a child witnessing their father's heart attack. But we also have little T's. We see it all the time on news, social media. It's happening all the time that we're looking at these things and observing them, even somebody yelling and shutting down. Those are all little T's. And if we're not recognizing that our body is constantly absorbing it and that needs to be moved in the body, whether it's shaking, whether it's like what you said, Alan, a good thing is toning it out, making sounds, and don't be conscious of the sounds that you're making. Get it out so that you're cleansing that energy point. So it's kind of recognizing that we all are experiencing some trauma on some level, and recognize how we don't want to just be with it and accept it. People that meditate regularly, that can come up for them, just sitting silent within ourselves and allowing in stillness emotions to come up. That's a wonderful way to also purge in some way with acceptance and just be with it. Just be with it, not try to get away from the discomfort. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
I think we have many questions coming in here.
We do. We have 2 questions. The first one is, who has been the most influential teacher or influence in your own inner growth?
I would say my wife. I met her 26 years ago at a time where I was leaving the corporate world to deprogram myself, to really try to find more of my authentic self. And she was a very free spirit in her way of looking at the world, and very artistic. She is Danish, so there was a foreign element to her, the way that she looked at the world. And we met at a human potential learning center called Esalen Institute. And that was very much encouraged for experimentation of self-actualization and realization, and going really deep in ourselves. So early on, having a relationship with somebody that was so encouraging, and she was constantly encouraging of anything that I was experimenting with, whether it was my clothes, and I really experimented with my clothes and colors, and or I remember one incident after we were married a few years. I got a letter from the IRS that said, I messed up and owed a whole bunch of money. And I went to her and said, "Oh, babe, man, I fucked up. I really messed up." And she looked at me and she said, "Yeah, you really messed up." And I thought, that is not what I want to hear. But the next sentence was, "That's it, Pripo. Mess it up. mess life up. You got to mess it up to try to understand it. And I was just like, oh, sweet. And it turned out a week later that the IRS sent me another letter. Go, oops, our mistake. You don't know anything, blah, blah, blah. So just that acceptance and allowing me to constantly experiment with who I am and take all the risks that we've had in our life. I mentioned earlier in the pre-podcast, we had a baby die in birth when about 21 years ago. So moving through that together in grief and acceptance and solidifying our relationship, definitely, I would say that she's been just an incredible life partner and journey. And the second person is my son. He's 24 years old, and he's just such an inspiration to me, and the gift to be able to be in his life and to be a present father that I was early on in his life. I didn't work for the first 4 years of his life. I just lived off of my savings because I just wanted to be really present, and to allow another human being to come into their own and yet still have some responsibility and guidance. So that constantly checked me in what my own guidance was that I wanted to pass on, how I was with him, checking and apologizing and owning my own shit in front of him. And that had to do with my father. And my father was a very, very, very kind and gentle man. All the men in my life were very loving and kind. So having that foundation, I think, really helped me in the fatherhood, my kind of yoga. Yeah.
So the other question that we have is, what is your advice on getting your partner to open up about what they need? Jumping back to earlier about how men naturally want to make their partner happy or give their partner what they need to be content. How do you make sure that they are being heard and not just giving you what you want?
Fire.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think it's really making the space that, again, what they're saying, that you're not trying to contradict it. Even if they say something that you saw totally different, you don't have to come in and tell them, no, that's not what it is. You're not telling me the truth. Allow them to find that themselves, and create that safety for them to express their needs. And one way to do that is doing it yourself. I think that when this comes to mind, it's a little bit off, but about being an inspiration to each other. I might have told this on the last podcast, but I remember when my wife and I got into a conflict and I walked out on the balcony. I said something stupid through the screen door, and my wife said, "What, love?" And I thought to myself, how in the hell did she get back to love that fast? I want to do that. She became an inspiration to me to want to let go, give the benefit of the doubt, and come back. So if you're able to express your needs, and if you're not judging it and accepting it and knowing that they can move, you become an inspiration for your partner to do that, and to give that space and that time, that it's okay, that if that person has a hard time opening up, that you understand it. And the biggest thing is watching if you're going to squash it, if you're going to criticize it. Criticism is guised in, I need to tell you what you're doing wrong because you don't recognize it, so I need to tell you. That's criticism, and nobody changes with criticism. So we need to be careful about the kind of feedback that we give to the other person. So compassion, really having compassion is a wonderful step.
We got 2 minutes in 30 seconds here.
Oh, darn.
So, Pripo, before, I want to make sure that we allow you to reveal yourself to everybody, where they can find you, where they can learn more about you. You have an amazing podcast. Talk about Pripo for a minute.
Thanks.
Of course.
Yeah, I have a podcast called Relationships. Let's Talk About It. And it's a weekly podcast. It's been up for a couple years. And it's a lot of different aspects of relationships. mainly focused on intimate relationships, but also friendships and working relationships. And so that's on all the platforms. I do monologues as well as conversations. So some of them are 30 or 40 minutes of me just talking about a particular subject. And I like to have a little bit of fun with it. I get a little singing voice in my little Detroit R&B sometimes. And I just got a new website up, Pripo.com. Yeah, I got Pripo.com. I got that as a gift from my stepsister. She looked it up and got it for me. And my son was here in the summertime from living in the Netherlands and designed the website for me. So that's up right now. And one part of it that I'm really happy about is I got a few guided meditations that are about 15 minutes long for people in different areas. Right now, I have increasing your emotional intelligence, where it's me guiding and verbalizing about it, emotional intelligence, and walking people through an exercise, as well as letting go of worry. I'll be working on other ones like letting go of past relationships, learning of appreciation for your partner, being the partner you want to be, letting go, increasing sleep and relaxation. So I get to use my voice in a different way with that. I'll be also doing some online courses with my wife on some couples work that can be accessed there. And I do my counseling and consulting right now online with what's going on with the pandemic. I'm not doing any in person. So some of the states are opened up for me to do that cross state wise. And so that's a possibility for people also.
Pripo, thank you so much for coming on.
Wow.
Also, I want to thank Emilia. She's the one, I remember the very first podcast she ever sent to me when her and I first got together was yours, and you guys were talking about nature and how healing that was. So thank you, sweetheart, for introducing me to Pripo. Thank you, Pripo, for coming on the show and adding so much value. I know that I had tons more questions I could have asked you, and everyone else probably feels the same. So thank you so much. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak, and I hope people got something out of it. And and also, if some of the questions weren't answered, you're welcome to contact me on my website, and I can answer some of those questions in a podcast. I'd like to do listeners' questions also on podcasts and elaborate on them.
Fire. Pripo, I said this when we interview you. It's just a feeling. Like, it's just a different feeling when you're talking, and I have so much love for you, genuinely. I appreciate your kindness, your gentleness, and your warmth, and I hope everybody got that as well. If you could leave the listeners with a 10-second blip on something motivational, inspirational, or something that will help them, what would it be, my friend?
Be kind to yourself. Just be kind to yourself so that you can be motivating for kindness in this world. So take care of yourselves, self-soothe. Only stakes get done. People don't get done. So we're all on a path. Yeah.
Well, we're very grateful to be on this path with you, Pripo. We appreciate you very much, my friend.
And if you need anything, Pripo, reach out, please.
Thank you. Wonderful podcast. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we love you. We don't have fans. We have family.
Talk to you soon. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining.